Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Doris MANGRUM, your host, and this is Stop the Madness, Practical Ways to Influence the Incarceration Crises, a series of education in our community. For those of you who are regular viewers, you know that we take on a number of topics around the incarceration crisis: problems, solutions, people, places, programs. But today we thought we'd take a look at something that's been around, that's needed to be addressed for a long time, but currently is right at the forefront of our news. Community policing, police and the community and relationships. We have as our guest, or I don't know if I really should call her a guest, she's been a kind of a contributor to Stop the Madness for some time, LORA SALL, who has a tremendous background in social justice, former police officer, community outreach person, and just a woman extraordinaire. So thank you for joining me today, Laura. This is going to be fun, I know. We have a topic today that has raised the hair, the anger, the voices of people around this country, and I would dare say around the world, around the need for a checking, if you will, of community policing and what can be done about it. But in your opinion and with your background, just give us kind of an overview of what you see encapsulates community policing. What does that mean?
Well, first of all, that's basically a buzz phrase.
Okay.
They've been using that buzz phrase for years. And I want us to get away from just the phrase and actually start recognizing that we're talking about human beings having a relationship with one another. Human beings who are working, who happen to be working as police officers, male and female, and human beings who happen to be living in a particular community, and how they relate to each other. We have people who live next door to each other who have different kinds of relationships, if at all a relationship. And then we have people who work together within the same environment who have different kinds of relationships, primarily because they come from different backgrounds. And we have to start recognizing that police and policing is a profession. The people who do the job are human beings who bring into the profession their own character or background, okay? And that's going to make a difference in how they relate to the people that they serve. Some people are on the job to serve the community, and there are other people who are on the job to control the community. And so it really depends on the character of the person who's in that job. The same as it would be the people who are working in a bank, or people who are working, you know, for PG&E or other professions. The kind of service that you get from those professions will vary depending on the person that's doing the job.
Well, you know, there's a lot of attention now that's been paid to the things that you've just mentioned in terms of the challenges that we're experiencing. I like the way you capitalize that with, you know, these are human beings. And they brought to the table something when they came into this career. Now, one of the other things I think that probably plays a place in, you know, the disproportionate stopping, arresting of black and brown people is racism. And not racism just of today, but if we look back historically, you know, the kinds of things that have been done to people of color. And then you take these individuals who now have been placed in a place of power. And so if we take that place of power and remember the racism, maybe some of the mix of the things that we're seeing that are not above board, if you will, are roosting in our communities of concentrated disadvantage. So where do we begin in terms of what can be done? What are our first steps, as you see it, to start not just a conversation, but to move that conversation from a place of just talking to some action.
Whoa. Well, first of all, we have to have the conversation.
Yes, agree that there needs to be one.
Exactly. And there are so many people who, as you said, feel like they've been communicating what they need, but they're yelling at each other and they're not hearing each other. And therefore, folks are shutting down and retreating, going elsewhere. Then other people feel like, look, I'm in power. I'm in control of this. You don't communicate with me. You follow what I tell you to do. I can remember an officer like that. And unfortunately, he came from another state on the East Coast, and he brought that kind of behavior with him to the Bay Area. And when it came time to back him up, you knew you were going to be in a fight, because he was always challenging people when it wasn't necessary, you know? And so it really is important for people to recognize, one, we have to communicate, and how that communication looks depends on who's in the room, okay? And how far that communication can go.
I think you hit something just very important right there. And we're just beginning to see it happening. Not just the communication, but who are we communicating with?
Yes.
We are beginning to see a change within the last, I would say, couple of years now, where we are recognizing the importance of not just having the same people talk, but then the people that are going to be most impacted by the decisions that are made at the table must be at that table.
Yes.
And so as we're bringing people to the table, and everyone who's going to be a part of receiving or giving, to remove some of the cynicism that exists between law enforcement and the citizens, everyone's voice must be heard. And I think you hit on it perfectly. You know, there's been a lot of talk, this community policing at the very beginning. You talked about the fact we've had this little buzzword from the very beginning, but I think now, for so many reasons, you know, because of the number of cases that have been brought to the forefront because of technology, the video cams, the cameras, all of these things where, you know, you can just on the spot, anybody is just taking pictures of things. So you can no longer just say, well, it was justified. You can no longer say, well, they had this or that and plant something on them. We now have proof that something was awry. And so because of that, I believe that we are at that opening where things are going to happen. Talk to us a bit about what you think needs to be done as it pertains to the other side. When I say the other side, the community, because a lot of what we hear, quite frankly, is all that the police are not doing. And there are a number of things that they are not doing, I would venture to say. But there must be some check, I believe, on the other side in terms of what can be done on the other side to bring that place where that communication can get to being more than just communication. What would you say are some of the steps that the people who are being affected by the unruly or out of control policing, what steps do they need to take in terms of trying to get to a place where we can now begin to communicate and effect a change?
Well, there are a number of groups, okay? You have groups of young people, you have groups of older folks, you have community groups that are addressing other issues that's going on in the community. And if you have a meeting going on, as you said earlier, everybody needs to be at the table. Well, if you're going to have a community meeting, how is it you can have a meeting where you need certain services in your neighborhood and you need some backup in your neighborhood, whatever you need, but the people who provide what you need are not at the table. You're just getting together so you can voice your concern and complain to each other. So we need to have those politicians in the room. You need to have law enforcement in the room. You have to have community folks in the room, not just the CEOs and the president of the organization. You have to have some residents in the room, and young and old. You have to have those gang members, that boy over there with his pants sagging, get him in the room and listen to what he has to say. His pants has nothing to do with his heart and what he has to say about what's going on around him. And so we have to take the time to start listening to each other and recognize that we all have a certain level of power. And they said the squeaky wheel gets the oil. It's true.
It is.
It's true.
It is.
But you don't have to be yelling in order to get that oil.
Once you get the oil, that tones down the noise.
Okay.
And so if we can recognize that, you know, our protesting and marching and all of that is necessary. Because if you notice, the talk happens after the voices are loud. But then if we continue to scream, that's going to back off people, in my estimation, in my experience, is what I've seen it. One of the things I think is important, and we're talking about it, but that people must come to these communities that are in greatest need or in dire straits, if you will, because of all the things that are negative that are happening. But they need to come before a 911 call. They need to come when no one has said that anything is going wrong. I think it's also important for people to recognize the importance of getting to know the diversity. And when I say getting to know diversity, not just who lives there, but what are the characteristics of the people who reside? How does the African American do certain things? How does the Hispanic, Latino culture do certain things? So these things that would make you have a little bit of pause if you don't understand. If you place yourself in the community, whether it be to live there, whether it be to come and play basketball with the kids or show up at the community center, then you begin to know the nuances. You begin to know, you see Joe in the corner, he looks like he might do something, but that's just the way Joe carries himself.
Absolutely.
So as you begin to immerse yourself into the community, there's a greater chance, I believe, that there will be an understanding, and vice versa. And so for me, I've often thought about this, Laura, and you tell me what you think about it, that in these academies and the training that our police officers are receiving, that somewhere along the line, there needs to be a place at the end or in the middle or wherever it's deemed to be important, that the people that they're going to most likely be serving are a part of that academy, so that they can be learning it.
What's difficult with that, and they actually have, depending on which academy, they have classes on policing the African American community or policing, you know, in a variety of cultures. But the challenge is when you get back to your department that you're working in, you don't know which neighborhood you're going to work in. And you have a FTO or field training officer that will guide you when you first start the job, and they teaching you the real policing. Forget about all that stuff you learned in the academy. I'm going to show you the real policing. And you just might have somebody who is a lot more loving and kind teaching you. And other times you have somebody that's teaching you, all right, we're going to do it my way, and I want you to follow this route. And so the problem is, too often people forget what's in their minds, the real self, and they want to be such a good officer and follow the rules, the blue code, okay, that they really ignore the fact that what so-and-so is teaching you is really not okay.
I think you hit on just, I mean, to me, when you said they already do this, but then you may come back and end up in a different community, I think you hit on a major problem. So why can't we train folks for the community they're going to be working in? Why can't that be the case? Why couldn't it be that you're being prepared? Just like you're on a job, on a regular job, you're prepared for what you're going to actually face, and what are the characteristics of that particular arena that you're going to be working in.
So that then the training needs not be in the academy necessarily.
Okay.
Or maybe a touch of it in the academy, and then once you get back to your...
After training.
Yes.
Okay.
So part of your field training is to go to a variety of cultural events maybe, or go to cultural community or community organizations and spend some time learning about that particular community that you now know you're going to be assigned to. So,
yeah, okay.
but you know, once again, we don't have time for that. We don't have money for that.
But I think we're in a great place, though, Laura. I really do, because, you know, we've had the slaughter of police officers. We've had the slaughter of black and brown youth at a very high level for decades. It's nothing new. I think, you know, with social media, the live streaming, all the cameras around, it's being brought out where now we have to deal with it. But getting to that place where police trust people and people trust police, that's what has us at this standoff. You know, instead of a person, when the youth see the police go, oh, there's what they call it, PO or OP, 5-0, sort of, no, 5-0's coming. And you know, we want to scatter, if you will. We want to, oh, let's go. Why, how do we change it around from, oh, there's 5-0, there's Officer Jones, let's go say hi. And what I've seen on television, of course, they highlight the stories of positive police officers on a regular basis. And there has been without fail, in each one of those specials, that particular individual, he or she, has been a part of the community. They've either been a part of the programming, they're coaching one of the teams in the community. They may not live there, or they may live there, but in some way, they've meshed themselves into the community's culture. And now there is a trust for police for the people and people for the police. It may be that only that one or two officers, but would it not be possible that we could take what's happening with the one or two officers that's positive and make it a map to go across the particular officer?
That would be wonderful.
But is that a perfect world that I'm thinking? It's, okay.
However, not impossible. It's just that I think it would take a while.
Oh, absolutely.
There's a quote that I wrote from Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
And it says, nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. Now, what happens is there are a number of people who get into positions of power and their character changes and they become this person that forgets that they are actually serving a community, serving their fellow man versus powering over that person. And what happens also in the community is that too often the only contact people have with a police officer is when they're calling 911 because of a problem. There needs to be occasions when the person who happens to be in a uniform can be invited to the community for something positive. The persons that only get positive responses from the community are firefighters. They are number one. You need help, you call a fireman. Your house is on fire, you're sick, whatever, you call a firefighter. But with the police, you only call the police if something bad is happening. And so there's this whole negative association with a police officer. Plus, you're taught in the academy, police officers are the only profession that can save a life and take a life in one day.
So true.
The only profession that can either save a life or take a life, all in one day.
You said something earlier that hit me, that, you know, it's not going to happen overnight. It absolutely is not going to happen overnight. And I think that that's some of the frustration that people have, because it's been happening for so long, and that's the bark, that's the anger. You know, this is just ridiculous, you know, why isn't something happening? Because when anything that has been going on forever has been allowed to happen forever, it's not going to turn around on a dime. Mm-hmm. So how do we get to those tiny A to A and a half, or 1 to 1.5, 1.5 to 2? You know, we know we have to first say that there is a problem, mm-hmm. and both sides recognize that there's a problem. And I think we're there. Not everywhere, not across the board, but in some of our larger cities. You've mm-hmm. seen in Baltimore, I believe, they just had a big situation where they had an outside firm that looked at all of the corruption that has been going, I mean, to ridiculous levels. Mm-hmm. But to me, that was an aha moment. While it just uncovered stuff that the community had been saying all along, the fact that the next step was taken to come and get someone outside of the police office to say, yes, it has, we're verifying and ratifying, if you will, that you have said. That is that place where now, okay, you believe us. We know you believe us because now you have your paper or whatever you needed. So now what do we do next? What are our next steps? So if we can begin to see that kind of thing happen across this country, in our small towns, in our counties, in our sheriff's departments, in our cities, at the level of our lawmakers, because that's where it all starts. The culture, you know, if you've got the attorneys who are saying, you know, well, just do what you need to do. You've got your judicial people saying, well, we're going to throw the book at them. It becomes that grand slam against the community. Mm-hmm. And so we've got a lot of things, I believe, that have got to change in order for policing to also change. Well, we're looking at policing today. There are others who are involved in this whole atmosphere or environment that has been created. The blue code, of course, mm-hmm. but then the knowing that you're going to get backed up by the attorneys, or you're going to get backed up by the judicial process, or backed up by law mm-hmm. enforcing laws enforcing people, the government.
Yes. Now, you said a mouthful.
I know.
I mean, really, you have touched on so much. First of all, we are not, you and I, are not saying there's anything wrong with what's being done right now. We're saying continue to do something, mm-hmm. okay? And so if what you're doing now is making you feel like you're making some progress, by all means continue.
Yes.
But the question is, how do you change racism? How do you change a racist mind? Okay? And see, we have to stop looking at the profession of law enforcement mm-hmm. as only being a community of racist cops. Mm-hmm. Because mm-hmm. I'm not a racist cop, okay? The person that recruited me and the number of other African Americans who are on the job, you can't call them racist. That young man that got killed in Dallas, mm-hmm. who happened to be brown, who was killed with the other Caucasian officers, okay, his loving family and the people, the other people who were killed also, their families were in pain just like the African American community is in pain over the brothers that have been killed. And so we have to recognize there is a behavior that is associated with the folks that are doing the killing of black and brown people that far exceeds the profession of law enforcement. Mm-hmm, and true. You need to look at how they're being recruited, how they're being trained, whether or not they are being screened and looked at where they come from. There are police officers who came straight out of Iraq who were trained to kill, mm-hmm. okay? Trained to kill. The officer that killed that 13-year-old brown child in Santa Rosa, 13 years old, carrying a toy weapon, a toy gun, okay? And he killed him. That officer was in Iraq, mm-hmm. had been deployed more than once, trained to kill. He's a sergeant now.
Yeah, just promoted.
Yeah. And so you have to look at, okay, did he go through any counseling once he transitioned back into the community, came back from fighting in the war and coming back home?
Was there any training after he shot the boy? Was there any training after any of that? Yes.
Was there any counseling for the community? Was there any counseling for that officer before he got hired as a police officer or deputy sheriff? Okay? Was there any kind of transition that was positive for him, his family, and that child's family, okay, with what has happened? And so all I'm saying is we have to take it a step further and not just look at being a police officer or the profession of law enforcement being all negative, but recognize that it's a community of human beings who bring certain characters, and once given power. I can remember once I left California and went back home to the Midwest, and I became a volunteer officer. That was the most scary experience for me, to work as a volunteer, non-sworn, no weapon.
But uniformed.
But uniformed. What was scary was not the community. It was the other folks who were volunteering and saw themselves in the powerful position. They could not pass the exams and become sworn. And so they just volunteer. But they were throwing around their weight to the point where it made me nervous, because they were assumed to be police officers because they were in uniform.
You know, a story is coming to mind as you're sharing this. I cannot remember the state, but it was a situation where a young man ultimately lost his life, where a volunteer officer rushes to the scene and misinterprets what they're seeing and starts shooting. And that young man is no longer with us. And so I hear the fear, and I see where that can be, you know, a very tricky place to be in. Now, something else comes to mind that I'd like to discuss around policing. This may be a little off topic in terms of what we can expect in terms of moving forward. When an officer is called to, you know, a situation, you know, the adrenaline flows. I've seen it in my, you know, in working with law enforcement for a number of years. There's a place that turns on, that gets excited, if you will, to move to whatever it is I've heard that is happening. How do we get to that place that we're making sure that people are going to, instead of being shot to kill, shot to lie down and not be wounding? And you know what? I'm seeing it. Oh my goodness, we're running out of time. We're not going to be able to discuss this. So we're going to have to come back and finish this topic. I can see that this is going to be one that we're going to need to discuss further. So I'm excited about what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about it some more. We're going to pick some specific things to bring out, particularly where we both can go forward, community and police officers, and everyone who's going to be impacted by the relationship. So thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again. Now go out and make this a great day. Do something good for someone else.